I wore the American flag on my sleeve in the darkest corners of the world. But the most painful betrayal didn't come from an enemy. It came from my own family. In a Vermont mansion, my brother-in-law threw a set of rusty truck keys at me and snarled, "Useless soldier, get the hell out of our sight." They didn't know that truck was a weapon, and the real war was just beginning. I am Captain Kaylin Vance, 33 years old, and I have survived ambushes in places that don't appear on most maps. But the most devastating strike of my life didn't come from an enemy combatant. It came from my own family, in a room paneled with polished cedar, on what was supposed to be a day of gratitude. The first snow of the Vermont season was falling outside my grandfather's study, blanketing the skeletal arms of the maple trees in a soft, quiet white. It was Thanksgiving weekend. We should have been gathered by the fireplace, passing around slices of pumpkin pie, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon and cloves. Instead, we sat like strangers awaiting a verdict. The silence in the room was a weapon. It was thick, suffocating, and aimed directly at me. I sat ramrod straight in the leather wingback chair, my posture a relic of military discipline I couldn't shake. Across from me, my family formed a united front. My older sister, Genevieve, a portrait of calculated elegance, subtly adjusted her Hermes silk scarf, a faint, predatory smile playing on her lips. Her husband, Sterling, a man who wore his wealth like armor, was ostentatiously checking the time on his Rolex Submariner. My father, Harrison Vance, CEO of Vance Holdings, methodically turned the pages of the Wall Street Journal, the rustle of the paper the only sound in the room. He hadn't made eye contact with me since I arrived from Ramstein Air Base. No one looked at me, but I felt their collective gaze, a heavy, dismissive weight that screamed a single deafening message: "You do not belong here." Our family lawyer, Arthur Finch, a man who had known me since I was a child, cleared his throat for the third time. A sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, betraying his discomfort. His hands trembled almost invisibly as he picked up the document, the last will and testament of General Frederick Vance, my grandfather, the only one who ever truly saw me. "As per the final and legally binding will," Arthur began, his voice strained as if he were reading his own indictment. The legal jargon flowed, a cold, indifferent river of words. The estate, the sprawling Vermont property we were sitting in, was to be transferred to Genevieve. The lake house in Maine, where I'd spent my childhood summers learning to fish with my grandfather, also went to Genevieve. The entire portfolio of stocks, the long-term investments, the controlling interest in Vance Holdings, all of it was to be transferred to Sterling Monroe. When he read Sterling's name, my brother-in-law let out a soft, deliberate cough, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. My father offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod of approval, his eyes still fixed on the stock market report. My mother, Eleanor, sat beside him, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. She stared at them as if they were the only things in the world she could control. Every word from the lawyer's mouth was a clean, bloodless incision, severing me from my own history. I felt nothing on the outside. Inside, it was a different story. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. But my face remained a mask of calm, a discipline forged in fire. Then Arthur Finch hesitated. He licked his lips, his gaze flicking nervously toward me for the first time. "And for Captain Kaylin Vance," he stammered, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "General Vance bequeaths his 1982 Dodge Ram pickup truck, currently parked in the barn." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so sharp, so profound, I could feel it in my teeth. Sterling couldn't contain himself. He shot up from his chair, a smug, vicious grin spreading across his face. He snatched the old tarnished keys from the lawyer's desk, strode across the polished hardwood floor, and threw them. They didn't fly through the air. He tossed them low, so they skittered and clattered across the floor, coming to a stop just inches from the toe of my boot. He leaned in, his voice a low growl, loud enough for everyone to hear, dripping with contempt. "A gift for the captain. Now take your rust bucket and get the hell out of this family's sight." He punctuated every word, his eyes gleaming with a cruel, victorious light. He wanted me to break. He wanted to see tears, to hear me argue, to witness my complete and utter collapse. It was the final public dismissal he had always craved. But I would not give him the satisfaction. The years of discipline, the endless drills, the muscle memory of controlling my response under fire, it all took over. I bent down slowly, my movements deliberate and steady. My knuckles brushed against the cold, worn metal of the keys as I scooped them up. My hand was as steady as a rock. I straightened up, my spine a steel rod. I looked directly into Sterling's gloating face, my gaze as empty and unreadable as a frozen lake, the same gaze I had used to face down men who wished me far worse than humiliation. And I said one word, "Roger that." I turned, my back straight, my steps even and sure. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, a confusing mix of shock, disdain, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of fear. They thought they had just dismissed me. They didn't understand. A ranger never retreats. They just regroup. And my grandfather's memory was now my rally point. I sat in the cold, cracked vinyl seat of the old Dodge Ram, the scent of my grandfather's life, engine oil, stale cigar smoke, and a faint hint of cedar, wrapping around me like an invisible cloak. The keys Sterling had thrown at me felt heavy in my hand, not with the weight of metal, but with the weight of years of calculated dismissal. That scene in the study wasn't a beginning. It was just the latest battle in a war I had been losing since childhood. The memories came flooding back then, uninvited, a tide of quiet humiliations that had shaped the very bedrock of who I was. The family dinners were never warm. They were board meetings disguised with silverware. Our dining room, with its mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, felt more like a courtroom. My father Harrison would sit at the head, grilling my sister, Genevieve, about her pre-law track at Yale. He'd dissect her papers, her debate club victories, her networking. "Have you met the Denson boy yet? I hear his father is on the board at Goldman Sachs. That's a connection you need, Genevieve." He spoke of her future as if it were a corporate acquisition, a valuable asset to the Vance portfolio. Then his gaze would shift to me. The warmth would vanish, replaced by a weary impatience. "Kaylin," he'd sigh, putting down his fork. "Still playing with those toy soldiers of yours? When are you going to do something feminine? Something that won't embarrass your mother at the country club?" My mother would quickly intervene, a nervous flutter in her voice. "Harrison, dear, pass the asparagus." Her silence was its own form of agreement, a quiet, desperate plea for peace at any price, even if the price was my self-worth. I learned to eat quickly, to make myself small, to retreat into the fortress of my own mind, where his words couldn't completely penetrate. I remember one Christmas with piercing clarity. I was 16. The massive Fraser fir in the living room towered over us, dripping with crystal ornaments and shimmering lights. Genevieve, radiant in a red velvet dress, unwrapped her main gift, a brand new MacBook Pro. An investment in the family's future, Harrison announced, beaming with pride as he clapped her on the shoulder. A top-tier lawyer needs top-tier tools. The message was clear. Genevieve was the future. She was the asset. Then it was my turn. I unwrapped a large, awkwardly shaped box. Inside was a new set of athletic gear and a pair of bright pink boxing gloves. The color was a clumsy, insulting attempt to make my passion more palatable, more girly. My father looked on, not with pride, but with a wry, dismissive smirk. "Hopefully that helps you burn off some of that aggression," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "A future husband won't appreciate a wife with a chip on her shoulder." Genevieve giggled, a sound like breaking glass. That night, I went down to the basement gym and punched the heavy bag until my knuckles were raw and bruised, not from anger, but from a profound, nameless sorrow. The pain in my hands was a welcome distraction from the ache in my heart. The final irreparable break came the year I turned 18. After months of quiet preparation and encouragement from my grandfather, I announced my decision to enlist in the Army with the goal of becoming a ranger. The house didn't just get quiet, it exploded. My mother burst into tears, wailing about the danger and the disgrace. My father, his face a mask of purple fury, slammed his fist on the mahogany table, rattling the antique porcelain. "I sent you to Phillips Exeter Academy," he roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous living room. "I gave you the best education money can buy, and you throw it away to be government-issued cannon fodder. You are an embarrassment to this family." He said I was shaming our name, abandoning my legacy, for a path meant for the lower classes, for people with no other options. Genevieve just stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watching me with a look of detached, clinical pity. She was already practicing the courtroom stare that would one day make her a formidable lawyer. Only one person stood with me. My grandfather, who had driven 3 hours in a snowstorm to be there, walked over and placed a firm, steady hand on my shoulder. His presence silenced the room. He looked my father dead in the eye. "To serve this country is never a disgrace, Harrison. It is the highest honor." Then he turned to me, his grip tightening. "You go, Kay. You serve with honor. That is the true Vance legacy." I remember the last time I saw him in the sterile beige room of the hospital. He was frail, tethered to machines, but his eyes were still the sharp, intelligent eyes of a general. He pressed his worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations into my hand. His finger, thin and papery, pointed to a passage he had underlined. "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." "They will never understand you, Kay," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Don't waste your energy trying to make them. Just be who you are. Your honor. That's a fortress no one can breach. Promise me." I promised. And that promise became my creed, my moral compass in the years that followed. Sitting in the cold truck, the engine silent, I let the last memory fade. The past wasn't just a collection of stories, it was the grid coordinates of my present. It explained the cold weight in my chest, the reason a rusty pickup truck felt more like a rescue than an insult. My grandfather said a ranger forges their own path. But what does that path look like when you're starting from the wreckage? My family thought I was running away. They were wrong. I wasn't running from anything. I was running to something. I was running to the one place on earth where the Vance name was just a name, where Harrison Vance's portfolio was irrelevant, and where Genevieve's calculated beauty was utterly useless. I was running to the United States Army Ranger School at Fort Benning, Georgia. Those 62 days were a forge, a crucible designed not just to test you, but to systematically break you down to your absolute core and see what, if anything, was left. The memories are seared into my mind like a brand. I remember the endless, sleepless nights, the gnawing hunger that became a constant, dull ache in my stomach, the feeling of being perpetually cold, wet, and exhausted. I remember the suffocating humidity of the Florida swamps, submerged for hours in black, leech-filled water, every muscle screaming in protest as we navigated through the alligator-infested terrain. I remember the brutal, jagged peaks of the Appalachian Mountains in Georgia, hauling a ruck that felt heavier than my own body, each step a monumental victory of will over physical collapse. I saw men twice my size, men covered in tattoos who talked tough back at the barracks, quit. I saw them ring the bell, voluntarily removing themselves from the course. I saw them break down and cry, defeated not by the enemy, but by their own limitations. But I didn't. I couldn't. Every time my body screamed for me to stop, every time the cold seeped so deep into my bones, I thought I'd never be warm again. My father's voice would echo in my head, a venomous whisper, useless cannon fodder. And a cold, hard resolve would settle in my gut. I would grit my teeth, ignore the burning in my lungs, shift the crushing weight on my shoulders, and keep moving. His disdain became my fuel. His disbelief became my determination. I wasn't just trying to earn the Ranger tab. I was rebuilding myself, piece by painful piece, from the wreckage they had left behind. My first deployment to Afghanistan was a different kind of test. The simulations were over. The rounds were live. The danger was visceral and ever-present. In the dust and chaos of a firefight, in the tense silence of a midnight patrol, I learned the most important truth of my life. No one cared who your father was. They only cared if you had their six. They only cared if you could do your job when everything was on the line. I found a new definition of family there, under the relentless, unforgiving sun. A family forged in sweat and blood and shared hardship. It was a bond formed while huddling together for warmth in the freezing desert night. A bond created while sharing the last tasteless spoonful of a cold MRE, a meal ready to eat in the back of a shaking Humvee. This brotherhood, this sisterhood, was built on an absolute, unspoken trust, earned through action, not inherited by birthright. It was something my family's money could never, ever buy. I never sent pictures home of me in uniform. I never wrote about my promotions. I didn't need their validation anymore. I just worked. I focused on the mission and on the soldiers I was responsible for. I moved up the ranks from second lieutenant to captain. I was entrusted with more responsibility, leading elite soldiers on critical missions in the most dangerous parts of the world. Every time a new rank was pinned on my uniform, I didn't think of my father's potential approval. I thought of my grandfather. I thought of the soldiers who placed their unwavering trust in me. That was the only recognition that mattered. My silence to my family wasn't weakness. It was focus. It was strength. I will never forget that day in the Korengal Valley, a place so hostile they called it the Valley of Death for good reason. The ambush came out of nowhere. A terrifying hail of machine gun fire erupted from the surrounding hills, pinning us down in a dry riverbed. I was caught in the open, separated from my squad, with nothing but a small, insignificant rock for cover. The air crackled and hissed, bullets whizzing past my head, kicking up spurts of dust just inches away. I was a sitting duck, and my time was running out. Then, through the deafening chaos, I saw him. Max Rivera, our SIGINT specialist, our signals intelligence guy, a man whose job was to stay behind the lines with the radios. He broke cover. Disregarding his own safety, he sprinted across the exposed, bullet-swept ground, a blur of motion and raw courage. He reached me, grabbed the back of my body armor, and hauled me with a grunt behind a larger rock outcropping. We collapsed into a heap as bullets chipped away at the stone, just inches from our heads. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just gave me a quick, sharp nod, his eyes already scanning the ridgeline for the next threat. And in that single selfless act, I understood. This was family. The kind that runs toward the danger for you. The kind that will never leave you behind, not because of a shared name, but because of a shared oath. I retreated to a small, rented cabin nestled in the pines a few miles from the Vance estate. It was rustic and bare bones, with a flickering lamp and spotty cell service, a world away from the polished grandeur I'd just left. The Spartan surroundings felt more like a forward operating base than a temporary home, and in a strange way, it was comforting. It was a space I could control. It was a space that demanded nothing of me. After discovering the USB drive in the Dodge's glove compartment, I knew my first move couldn't be to a lawyer. The legal world was Genevieve's territory, a battlefield where she held every advantage. I needed a different kind of expert. I needed an ally I could trust with my life, because this felt like it was escalating into that kind of fight. I needed Max Rivera. My fingers felt strangely hesitant as I scrolled through my phone's contacts to find his number. It had been 2 years since we last spoke, after he'd honorably discharged and moved to Austin, Texas, to start a small cybersecurity firm. Life moves on, people lose touch. I wasn't sure what I expected. He picked up on the second ring, his voice as calm and steady as I remembered it. Captain. He didn't say K. He used my rank. It wasn't a formality, it was a sign of respect, a recognition of the world we came from. I gave him the situation report, my voice even and concise, stripping the story down to its tactical components: the will, the truck, the USB drive. I reported the facts, leaving out the raw, ragged emotion of the betrayal. With Max, I didn't need to. He could hear it in the silence between my words. Before I could even formally ask for his help, he spoke. "Send me the files, encrypted channel. I'll take a look, no charge." The offer hung in the air, so simple and unconditional it almost didn't register. In my world, everything came with a price, a hidden clause, an expectation. "Max, I can't ask you to do that," I started, a reflexive protest. He cut me off, his voice firm, losing its casual tone for a moment. "Kay," he said, and the switch to my first name made me catch my breath. "You took a round for my team in that valley. This isn't a debt. It's just what we do. Besides," he paused, and I could almost hear the wry smile in his voice, "I hate bullies, especially the ones in expensive suits." A warmth spread through my chest, a feeling so foreign I almost didn't recognize it. It was a stark contrast to the icy chill that had settled in my heart in my grandfather's study. It was the memory of a chaplain who once told me, "Even in the valley of the shadow, Captain, there is light if you know where to look." Max was that light. I sent him the files without a second's hesitation. There was no need for a non-disclosure agreement, no need for lengthy explanations. I knew he wouldn't ask pointless questions. He wouldn't judge. He would just get the job done. That was the profound beauty of he was the family I had chosen. "I'll be in touch as soon as I have something," he said before hanging up. The call ended, but something new had just begun. I was no longer a lone operative in enemy territory. I had an ally. The USB drive was no longer just a puzzle left by my grandfather. It was now an active mission file. And for the first time, this mission wasn't about defending a remote outpost or securing a hostile target. It was about fighting for the honor of the one man who had always believed in me. I finally had my orders. The warmth from Max's call hadn't even fully settled before the cold front of my family blew back in. It came in the form of a knock on the cabin door so soft it was almost lost to the wind whistling through the pines. It was Genevieve. She stood on my rickety porch, wrapped in a cream-colored cashmere coat, holding a bottle of expensive Cabernet as if it were a white flag. She looked completely out of place, an orchid in a field of weeds. "I was just in the area," she lied smoothly, her smile practiced to perfection. "I was worried about you, Kay. I was afraid you felt abandoned." The words were sweet, but her eyes were not. They were the cold, assessing eyes of a lawyer sizing up a witness, darting around the Spartan room, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on my closed laptop. This wasn't a visit. This was a reconnaissance mission. Her objective, to gauge my morale, to probe for weaknesses, to see if I was a threat. I played my part, offering her a glass of water, my expression as neutral as the landscape outside. She eventually left, her mission inconclusive. Mine, however, was just beginning. I accepted her invitation to dinner the following evening, not out of a naive hope for reconciliation, but because every soldier knows you don't turn down an opportunity to gather intelligence on your adversary. The restaurant was one of those painfully chic places in Burlington, with low lighting, hushed tones, and wine lists thicker than a field manual. It was their home turf. My father launched into a monologue about a multi-million-dollar merger. Sterling bragged loudly about their upcoming ski trip to a private lodge in Aspen, a place where, he made sure to mention, you don't see just anybody. They were drawing the lines, reinforcing the walls of their exclusive world, a world where I, in my simple black sweater, was a foreign intruder. I let them talk, listening with the trained ear of an intelligence officer, filtering out the noise to find the signal. Then Genevieve, with the timing of a seasoned performer, turned the conversation to our grandfather. Her voice took on a somber, theatrical tone. "You know, Kay," she said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. "I'm so grateful I was there with him in those final days. He was so weak. I read to him, held his hand for hours. It was a comfort knowing he wasn't alone." I felt a surge of nausea so intense I had to grip the fork under the table to steady myself. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. I knew for a fact, from the preliminary medical records I'd managed to obtain, that our grandfather had been heavily sedated and largely unresponsive for most of that final week. She wasn't by his side out of love. She was there to ensure her plan went off without a hitch. The main course arrived, but the psychological warfare continued. Sterling, his confidence bolstered by his second glass of overpriced Cabernet, leaned forward with a smirk. "Hey, Kay," he said, his voice laced with mock curiosity. "I hear you Army types are trained to endure hardship, right? A rusty old truck shouldn't be a problem for a tough ranger like you. Just think of it as another field exercise." He laughed, a short, barking sound, and Genevieve joined in with a delicate, tinkling laugh of her own. My father just took a slow sip of his wine, a ghost of a smile on his lips. They were prodding me, baiting me. They wanted an emotional outburst, a flash of anger they could use as proof of my supposed instability. "See, we told you she was unhinged." It was a classic interrogation technique. Apply pressure until the subject breaks. But I had been trained by masters of pressure. I simply took a sip of water, my face a blank slate, my heart rate steady. I remembered a lesson from SEER school: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. Never let them control your emotional state. I waited for a lull in the conversation. I let the silence stretch for a beat, making them lean in, making them wait for my response. Then I decided to launch a probe of my own. "The truck isn't the problem," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the table with absolute clarity. "The problem is that the will was changed." The effect was instantaneous. It was like dropping a flashbang grenade into their polite, sophisticated dinner party. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Sterling's smirk vanished. Genevieve's practiced smile froze on her face. My father slowly, deliberately, placed his wine glass on the table, the clink echoing in the sudden silence. I had hit a nerve, a major one. It was Genevieve who recovered first. Years of courtroom battles had given her a composure of ice. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing not with anger, but with a cold, calculating curiosity. "Is that so?" she purred, her voice a silken threat. "That's a very serious accusation, Kaylin." She leaned forward, the mask of a loving sister replaced by the face of a ruthless litigator. "Do you have proof, little sister?" The challenge was laid down, a gauntlet thrown across the white linen tablecloth. She was confident, certain I had nothing. She had made a critical error. She had underestimated her opponent. I drove back to the cabin from that dinner, Genevieve's challenge echoing in my ears. "Do you have proof, little sister?" The words were a taunt, a confident dismissal. But the real breaking point, the final tripwire, didn't come from her arrogance. It came the next morning, delivered with the sterile chill of corporate warfare. It was an email from Genevieve's law firm. The subject line was simple: "Re: the estate of Frederick Vance." The body of the email was anything but. It was a cold, formal legal document, a settlement offer. They were proposing to give me a one-time reintegration assistance payment of $5,000. $5,000. In exchange, I was to sign an attached document, a legally binding waiver relinquishing any and all future claims against the estate. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. $5,000. They had put a price tag on my silence. They had quantified my father's disdain, my sister's greed, and my own years of service into a sum that wouldn't even cover the down payment on a decent used car. This wasn't a settlement offer. This was the ultimate insult, gift-wrapped in legal jargon. It was a final attempt to erase me, to buy my acquiescence, and reduce my entire existence to a minor $5,000 nuisance. And for the first time since returning home, I felt the ice inside me crack. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't disappointment, it was rage, a pure, cold, clarifying rage that burned away all the confusion and hurt. It rose from the depths of my soul, a dormant volcano suddenly roaring to life. I had faced down men with guns. I had walked through the valley of the shadow of death. I'd seen the worst of humanity in forgotten corners of the world. But I had never, ever felt so profoundly violated. They weren't just taking my inheritance. They were trying to strip me of my story, my honor, my very identity. They thought I was a stray dog that could be shooed away with a few scraps from their table. My hands clenched into fists. I pushed back from the small table, the legs of the chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. I needed air. I needed space. I strode out of the cabin and marched toward the old barn, my boots crunching on the frosted ground. I swung open the heavy, creaking door and stepped into the familiar quiet. I climbed into the cab of the Dodge Ram, the cracked leather seat a familiar comfort. My hands gripped the cold, worn steering wheel. I looked at the faded photograph of me and my grandfather, tucked into the sun visor. Me, a gap-toothed kid. Him, a proud general. I spoke, my voice a raw whisper in the stillness of the barn. "Grandfather," I said to the ghost of him, to the memory that lived inside me. "They've gone too far. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry I stayed quiet." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "But not anymore. I will not let them tarnish your name. I will not let them win." A new resolve, as hard and unyielding as granite, settled in my heart. "I will fight, I swear it." The oath was silent, but it was the most binding one I had ever taken. I walked back to the cabin, the rage now transformed. It was no longer a wild fire. It was a controlled burn, focused and purposeful. The fog of grief and confusion had lifted, leaving behind a terrifying, crystal-clear path forward. I knew exactly what I had to do. I sat down at my laptop. I didn't delete the email. I saved it, printed it, and filed it away. It was no longer an insult. It was Exhibit A. I created a new, secure folder on my encrypted hard drive. I named it Operation Justice. The Ranger Creed, the very first thing they drill into your head, echoed in my mind. Rangers lead the way. It was time for me to lead. It was time to plan the most important mission of my life. A war fought not with rifles and grenades, but with evidence, depositions, and the cold, hard truth. I stood at a crossroads. One path was easy. Take the money, sign the paper, and let them bury my grandfather's honor and my own self-respect forever. The other path was a declaration of war against my own family. A fight I could very well lose. A fight that would cost me everything I had left. If you were in my shoes at that exact moment, what would you have done? Comment 1 if you believe I had to fight. Comment 2 if you think I should have taken the offer and walked away. I really need to know I wasn't alone in this. The time for grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. The time for anger had passed. Now was the time for cold, hard strategy. Inside the secure folder on my laptop, meticulously labeled Operation Justice, I began to assemble my arsenal. Every successful military operation begins with superior intelligence gathering, and I treated this personal war with the same unwavering discipline. My first call, my only call, was to Max. "Max, I'm sending you the encrypted files from the USB," I said, my voice low and steady over the secure, untraceable line. "I need a full forensic analysis, and I need a deep dive, everything you can find on a shell corporation named Cypress Holdings." "Roger that, Captain," was his immediate, unquestioning reply. A few hours later, as the pale Vermont dawn broke, the first intelligence report landed in my inbox. Max's analysis was swift, precise, and brutal. The USB contained a cryptically named audio file. With a steady hand, I clicked on it. My grandfather's voice, frail from illness but ironclad with conviction, filled the small cabin. "This is not what I agreed to," he said, his words sharp with indignation. "I will not change it now." The recording cut off abruptly. It was a fragment, a shard of the truth, but it was powerful. Max's research also confirmed my darkest suspicions. Cypress Holdings was an opaque shell company with a convoluted paper trail that, after peeling back several layers, led directly back to a boutique consulting firm owned by my sister Genevieve. We had our first piece of actionable intel, but a fragment wasn't enough to win a war. I needed the kind of evidence that was irrefutable. I needed a smoking gun. I needed to get inside their defenses. My mind kept returning to the dinner, to Genevieve's almost pathological attachment to her iPad. In my world, when someone guards an object that closely, it's either a weapon or it contains vital intelligence. I decided to find out which. That night, under the cover of a minor snowstorm that muffled all sound and erased all tracks, I made my way back to the Vance estate. My ranger training took over, my body moving with an ingrained, silent efficiency. Bypassing their cheap, commercial-grade alarm system, a system designed to deter teenage pranksters, not a trained operative, was child's play. I moved through the silent, opulent house like a ghost, my footsteps measured, every shadow an ally. I found the iPad charging on the mahogany desk in the study, glowing softly in the dark. The password? I took an educated guess based on my sister's predictable arrogance and obsession with social climbing. It was the birthday of the son of a wealthy business partner she was trying to impress. It took me one try, disgustingly predictable. I plugged in my encrypted drive and initiated a full data clone. 10 minutes later, I was gone, melting back into the swirling snow, leaving no trace of my presence. Back in the cold security of my cabin, I felt the familiar, adrenaline-fueled thrill of a successful exfiltration mission. Max and I worked through the night, a continent apart, but connected by an encrypted link, sifting through the mountain of cloned data. We waded through a digital swamp of scanned receipts from Neiman Marcus and RSVPs to charity galas until we found it. Buried deep within a folder ominously labeled Contingency, we hit the motherlode. Inside was another draft of the will, its metadata showing it had been created and modified just 2 days before my grandfather's death. And next to it, the critical piece of evidence, a saved voicemail from our family lawyer, Arthur Finch. I clicked play. His voice was no longer the confident, smooth baritone of a respected attorney. It was a panicked, reedy whisper, the sound of a man in over his head. "Genevieve, I can't be comfortable with this," he stammered, his breathing ragged. "If Harrison finds out, God, if she finds out, this is illegal. We shouldn't be reprinting anything. I'm out." The timestamp on that voicemail was damning. 8 p.m., the night before, the will was officially filed. This was it. This was proof of conspiracy, coercion, and intent. This was the smoking gun. But I knew that even with a smoking gun, I couldn't fight a legal war alone. I needed ground support, an expert in this different kind of battlefield. A friend from my unit, now a state trooper in Vermont, had given me a name, Marissa Thorne. "She's not from one of the big, stuffy Burlington firms," he'd said. "She's a bulldog, young, hungry, and actually believes in justice." Her office was a small, no-frills space above a bustling coffee shop, a world away from the marble lobbies and mahogany desks of Genevieve's firm. Marissa was sharp, with intelligent, perceptive eyes that missed nothing. She listened intently, without interruption, as I laid out the timeline, presenting the evidence not as a grieving, emotional granddaughter, but as a commander briefing a mission. I showed her the email, played her the audio files, and walked her through the financial data from Cypress Holdings. When I finished, she didn't offer empty condolences. She leaned forward, a fierce, predatory light in her eyes. "Captain Vance," she said, her voice humming with a controlled, righteous energy. "This isn't just a will contest. This is a coordinated, criminal conspiracy to commit fraud." She stood up and began pacing, her mind already formulating a legal strategy, connecting the dots. They think because they have money and power, they're untouchable. They're about to find out how wrong they are. She looked at me, a determined, confident smile on her face. We have the intel, we have the motive, and now, thanks to you, we have the legal ammunition. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a fundamental shift in the balance of power. I was no longer on the defensive. I had my team, I had my evidence. I finally had the firepower I needed to fight back. The Vermont District Courtroom was a theater of polished wood and quiet, suffocating tension. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of old paper and the unspoken weight of consequence. I sat beside Marissa Thorne, my posture an unyielding column of military discipline. My hands rested calmly in my lap, my heart a steady, disciplined drumbeat. This was the objective. This was the moment of engagement. Across the aisle, my family projected an aura of bored, untouchable confidence. Genevieve, in a sharp navy blue power suit, whispered to her lead counsel, a man with a mane of silver hair and a reputation for tearing witnesses apart. Sterling fidgeted with his silk tie, attempting an air of casual relaxation he failed to achieve. My father Harrison stared straight ahead, his face an inscrutable mask of corporate indifference, as if this were a minor inconvenience. They believed this was their stage, where their rules applied. They were about to receive a harsh lesson in jurisdiction. Their lawyer, Preston Hayes, began. His voice was a smooth, condescending baritone. He painted a picture of me as a troubled, resentful veteran, emotionally unstable from my time overseas, lashing out with baseless accusations out of jealousy for my sister's success. He used terms like post-traumatic stress and familial envy, attempting to discredit me before I had a chance to speak. I met his gaze without flinching, letting his words wash over me like ineffective propaganda. I had faced far worse than a lawyer in $1,000 suit. Then it was Marissa's turn. She stood with a quiet, powerful stillness that commanded attention. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, "we are not here to discuss my client's distinguished military service. We are here to present facts. And the first fact is this: the will submitted to probate is a fraudulent document." Hayes shot to his feet. "Objection. Counsel is making inflammatory and unsubstantiated claims." "I intend to substantiate them, Your Honor," Marissa replied coolly. "With the court's permission, I would like to play Exhibit A." The judge nodded. Marissa clicked a key on her laptop. The courtroom fell silent. And then my grandfather's voice, frail but resolute, filled the space. "This is not what I agreed to. I will not change it now." The impact was immediate. A quiet gasp went through the gallery. I watched Genevieve. For a single fleeting moment, her mask of composure slipped. A flicker of pure panic crossed her eyes before she stamped it out. Her lawyer was on his feet again. "Objection, provenance unknown. This could be from any time." Marissa remained unperturbed. "I agree, Your Honor, the context is unclear. Perhaps Exhibit B can provide it." She played the second file. This time it was the voice of Arthur Finch, their own lawyer, reedy and terrified. "Genevieve, I can't be comfortable with this. This is illegal. We shouldn't be reprinting anything. I'm out." The silence was no longer just quiet. It was a physical entity, a crushing weight. I saw Arthur Finch, sitting in the back row, shrink in his seat. His face turned the color of ash. Every eye, including the judge's, was now fixed on my sister. The confident smile she had worn into the courtroom had vanished. replaced by a tight, brittle line. But Marissa wasn't finished. She moved with the brutal efficiency of a special forces raid, giving them no time to regroup. "Your Honor, we now present Exhibit C," she announced, and an image of the fraudulent will's metadata appeared on the courtroom screens. It clearly showed the document was created and finalized 2 days before my grandfather passed, during a period when, as Marissa noted, medical records would confirm he was under heavy sedation and legally incapacitated. "Exhibit D," she continued, her voice relentless. A complex spreadsheet appeared, a web of transactions. Marissa calmly explained how it showed the flow of funds from a family trust into the Cypress Holdings shell company, with dates corresponding to large, unexplained consulting fees paid to a firm owned by Genevieve. "And finally, Your Honor, Exhibit E. The email. The one offering me $5,000 to sign away my rights." Marissa read it aloud, her voice ringing with cold, professional fury. The phrase "reintegration assistance" hung in the air like a foul odor, an insult to every soldier who has ever served. With each new piece of evidence, I watched my family's fortress of arrogance crumble, brick by brick. The color drained from Genevieve's face, leaving a waxy, artificial pallor. Her hands were gripping the edge of the polished table as if for support. Sterling sat frozen, his mouth slightly agape, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. I saw him glance at his lawyer, a desperate, pleading look, but the man could only shake his head, his own confidence shattered. And my father, Harrison, the unshakable CEO, had a muscle twitching uncontrollably in his jaw. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor of cold indifference. It wasn't remorse, it was fear. Judge Whitaker had listened to it all without a single change in her expression. Now she slowly removed her glasses and set them on the bench, her gaze sweeping over Genevieve, Sterling, and their shell-shocked legal team. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the immense, unyielding weight of the law. "This court has heard sufficient and deeply troubling evidence to suggest a high probability of undue influence, conspiracy, and what appears to be blatant testamentary fraud." She looked at me for a moment, then back at them. The room held its breath. Then the gavel fell. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final, a sharp, definitive crack that echoed through the silent courtroom, a sound of judgment. "Therefore," Judge Whitaker declared, her voice resonating with authority, "this court orders an immediate and temporary freeze on all assets, accounts, and properties related to the estate of Frederick Vance, pending a full investigation by the state attorney's office into these most serious allegations." She looked directly at Genevieve, her eyes like chips of ice. "Your games are over in this courtroom, counselor." It wasn't a loud, cheering victory. It was the quiet, satisfying click of a well-laid trap snapping shut. The game was over. Or was it just the beginning of the end? The aftermath of the hearing wasn't a single, triumphant explosion, but a series of quiet, devastating implosions that radiated outward. The shockwaves rippled through the polished, insular world of my family faster than I had anticipated. The Burlington Free Press ran a story on the front page of its local section, discreetly placed but impossible to miss. Vance family fortune frozen amidst allegations of fraud. It didn't mention me by name, but it didn't have to. The Vermont Bar Association, citing the public court record, announced an immediate, formal investigation into the professional conduct of Genevieve Vance, Esquire. The empire of deceit, so carefully constructed, began to publicly disintegrate. The first crack came in the form of a phone call from an unknown number late one evening, a few days after the hearing. I answered. It was Sterling. The arrogant, barking attack dog I had faced was gone. In his place was a wheedling, pathetic stranger, his voice slick with a desperate false familiarity I found repulsive. "Kay, listen," he began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding, a big one. We're family, right? At the end of the day, we're family. We can still sort this out quietly, between us." He wasn't talking about reconciliation. He was talking about damage control, about protecting his assets from the freeze. I didn't say a word. I just pressed the end call button on my phone. The click of the disconnection, a definitive, satisfying sound. The boundary had been drawn. There was no us left to sort out. The next contact was more difficult. A text message from my father. "Meet me, the coffee shop on Church Street, 10 a.m. It wasn't a request, it was a summons, a final assertion of an authority he no longer possessed. I went, not because I owed him obedience, but because I owed myself a final closure. For the first time, I saw him not as a titan of industry, but simply as an old, tired man, diminished by his own choices. He sat stirring a cup of black tea he never drank, his movements slow and heavy. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. He looked at me, his eyes clouded with a bitterness that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own shattered pride. "You've ruined the family name," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual booming confidence. I looked right back at him, the clatter of the coffee shop fading into the background. My own voice was calm, steady, and free of the anger that had fueled me for so long. "I didn't ruin it," I said. "I just exposed the truth of it. Honor isn't something you can buy at a stockholders' meeting, Dad." He had no response. The word honor was a foreign language to him. He simply stood up, left a crisp $20 bill on the table, and walked away. As I watched his retreating back disappear into the crowd of shoppers on Church Street, I knew with a certainty that was both painful and liberating that I was watching him walk out of my life forever. That door was now closed and locked. I had won. I had brought the truth to light. But as the days turned into a week, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. There was no victory parade, no sense of triumph. There was just a vast, hollow emptiness, a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I had spent my entire adult life defined by them, either by running from their judgment or now by fighting against their corruption. The war was over. I had proven them wrong. But now what? What was my next mission? I sat in the quiet of my cabin for hours, staring out at the stoic, silent green mountains, their peaks shrouded in mist. I thought about a quote from my grandfather's worn copy of Meditations. "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do." I had stopped caring what they did, but I hadn't yet figured out what I was supposed to do next. I realized that breaking out of a prison doesn't automatically tell you how to live in the free world. There's a disorienting, terrifying silence that follows the end of a long war. Then, one crisp autumn evening, as the sun bled purple and gold across the horizon, my phone rang, shattering the quiet. The screen displayed a single word: Mom. My heart gave a painful, reflexive lurch. It was the first time she had initiated contact since this all began. I let it ring twice, my throat suddenly dry, before answering. Her voice was a fragile, trembling thread on the other end of the line, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Kay, can you meet me at the lake house? There's something I need to tell you." something I should have told you years ago. I stood there motionless, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The hum of the small refrigerator was the only sound in the room. This was it, the one confrontation I had both dreaded and somewhere deep down hoped for. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the last loose end. I knew I had to go. I had to see this mission through to its absolute end. "I'll be there," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. I met my mother on the porch of the lake house in Maine. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile against the vast gray expanse of the water. We sat in the old Adirondack chairs, a pitcher of iced tea sweating between us, untouched. The silence was different this time. It wasn't hostile, just heavy with the weight of unspoken years. "I knew," she finally whispered, her voice barely carrying over the gentle lapping of the waves. "I knew about the original will. Arthur Finch told me. He said, 'Fred wants it to be fair.' But Genevieve, she was so convincing." She wouldn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the distant shoreline. "She said it would keep the peace, that you had your own life, your own career, that you wouldn't want to be burdened." "And you believed her?" I asked, my voice soft, devoid of accusation. It was just a question. "I chose to," she corrected, and for the first time I heard a flicker of self-awareness in her tone. "I chose the easier path. I was afraid of Harrison's anger, afraid of the family breaking apart." She then told me that on the night before my grandfather died, he had a moment of clarity. He had grabbed her hand and whispered, "Tell Kay, the truck, it's the key." She had kept that secret, buried it under her fear. I didn't forgive her. Forgiveness felt too simple for a wound that deep. But for the first time, I think I understood her. Then she revealed one last thing. "The glove compartment," she said. "Your grandfather had it modified years ago, a fingerprint lock. It only opens for you." I walked back to the old Dodge, a new sense of purpose guiding my steps. I found the small, almost invisible sensor on the latch. I pressed my thumb against it. There was a soft, mechanical click. The compartment opened. Inside, beneath a worn leather map of New England, was a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from him. He wrote of his immense pride in the woman I had become, of honor, of integrity. "I knew you were strong enough to find the truth, Kay," he wrote. "I just had to make sure you had the tools." Tucked behind the letter was an old passbook for a savings account. Opened the day I was born, an account my family had always told me was lost in a bank merger. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a foundation. It was proof. The final court proceedings were a formality. The original will was reinstated. I was legally entitled to 1/3 of the estate. But standing in Marissa's office, looking at the documents that represented my victory, I realized the money meant nothing to me. The fight was never about the money. "I have one more document for you to draft," I told Marissa. She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I took a deep breath. "I want to transfer my entire share of the inheritance. I used the money from my grandfather's lost savings account to get the old Dodge Ram running like new. The rest, every last cent of the inheritance, went into establishing the General Frederick Vance Honor Scholarship Fund, a foundation dedicated to providing educational grants for the children of disabled veterans and fallen soldiers." "Are you sure, Kay?" Marissa asked gently, her hand hovering over the final signature line. "I'm sure," I said, a sense of profound peace settling over me. Justice isn't a check you cash, it's an action you take. I left Vermont on a crisp spring morning. I drove the old Dodge, its engine now a steady, quiet hum. The cab filled with the scent of new leather and old memories. I didn't have a destination, no set coordinates on a map. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. I was not bound by my family's expectations or my past battles. The road stretched out before me, winding through the green mountains, bathed in the clean light of a new dawn. My grandfather's legacy wasn't the money or the property, it was the strength he had instilled in me, the unwavering belief in my own honor. And my legacy, the one I was just beginning to build, would be what I chose to do with that strength. The war was over. My journey was just beginning. That was my story, but I know I'm not the only one who has fought a silent war. My grandfather taught me that honor is a fortress you build within yourself, a truth that no one can take from you. It took me a long time to learn that lesson, and I couldn't have done it without the belief of a few good people. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this journey resonated with you the most? If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories that matter. Your voice is important here. Let's continue to build this community together.